Pezik show. I am so pumped on this podcast to be talking about podcasting, the power of it, how it can be a strategic connection and business tool when you understand it and you use it right. And I'm not going to be telling you all about this. I have the most wonderful expert in podcasting. My friend, Michelle Abraham, is here with us today. Michelle, welcome to my podcast.
Thanks, Lisa, so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to the podcasting queen herself too. Like your podcast is amazing. So I love that you're just on the podcasting bandwagon like me.
Yeah, I love it, love it, love it. And just side note, listeners, if you're out there, my Yeti just fried itself literally right before I got on this podcast. So still here, still doing the darn thing, but if the sound quality isn't as expert as you always hear it, that is why I guess I get to go shopping and perhaps buy myself some new equipment, which is always fun. But we're still here and we're still going to do the darn thing. So let me tell you about Michelle. Michelle is an international speaker, podcast host, and podcast producer, and was voted number 16 of the top 50 moms in podcasting by Podcast Magazine. She is the founder of Amplify You. Now, the name is changing. She was just telling me. But for right now, it's Amplify You. Kevin Harrington. Isn't that Mr. Wonderful? Mr. Wonderful. The original,
no, the other one. That's the Canadian one.
Oh, that's the Canadian one. Oh, right. Oh, yes. The original shark on the TV hit show, Shark Tank, says Amplify You is North America's top podcast management company. You see, this is why I have Michelle here. Her team and her have launched and managed well over 100 podcasts in the last 12 months and manage over 50 shows weekly. She is also the co-founder of the Canadian Podcast Network and mypodcastcoach.com. Something that's so cool, the first question I asked her is, where the heck are you right now as we're filming this? Because Michelle, she doesn't just talk about living that freedom lifestyle. She lives off the grid on boat access, side of her lake, and drives her kids to school and the bus by boat. How cool is that? While running a 100% online business. And she's been mentoring and sharing her passion for podcasters since 2012. She's been around the block, and I'm so glad that you're here. So podcasting, what I hear a lot when people come to us to build the assets that they build, they're rebranding or they're building a brand, they want a course or a membership, that word podcast always seems to creep in there. People say, oh, and my dream has always been to have a podcast. But what, Michelle, are some of the, and sometimes they tell me, sometimes they don't, but in your industry and what you've seen, what are some of the main reasons why people don't start that podcast?
Oh my gosh, yes. It is actually coming up in conversation so much. In fact, I was talking about it on the weekend at a wedding. We were talking about it. And, she's like, how can my business use podcasting? It's one of those things that it's becoming more mainstream. More people are listening now. Thank goodness. In 2012, I talk about podcasts and people are like, what the hell are you talking about? They don't understand what this is. And so now it's so great. So it's a lot more accessible. It's a lot easier for people to get started, but there's still this big but, this big, I'm not going to do it because, and what we find, there's really 4 things that stop people from getting started. And I know these 4 things myself because they stopped me for many years. I couldn't figure out what the heck I wanted to talk about on the podcast. I knew I wanted one. I knew how to start them. In fact, I was already helping other people start theirs. I just didn't know what I wanted to talk about until I realized it's podcasting is what my passion is. So once I finally figured that out, it was a lot easier to get going. So the main thing that stops people, I find, is one is the idea that you need so much equipment. You need a headset, a microphone, and tons of this fancy equipment that costs a lot of money. And if you're not going to sound like a professional with a voiceover studio, then you should just not start. And I think that's, I have this image when I share about this, and on webinars, that's this picture of like all this equipment. And then really what you actually need is just your microphone and a computer. And in fact, we're on Zoom right now. So those three things are magic.
Yes. Yes. And even if your microphone dies, you can still do the thing and make the sound quality better once you know, or once you
That's right.
right?
And like poor Lisa, you're like there with the microphone and it dies on you, and still we can just make it sound better in the post-production. So no problem, right? So this fear of like getting started with all this equipment, you know, my mentor, he in podcasting, he was telling me how he used to have a dial-up connection with a microphone where they would hold it to it and then they press play on the recorder. And that's how they got the podcast going. I was like, wow, we are so lucky that it's just a lot easier these days. So that's amazing. And so that's the one thing that I think that's the biggest but I get is, but I don't have all the right equipment. So don't worry, just get started. The second thing is a fear. And, you know, most people might think that this is a fear of being heard or getting their voice out there, but it's actually, well, we see both. We see the fear of the voice getting out there, but also we also see the fear of like, what happens if this thing really takes off? Like, I'm not really prepared for that. So before I even get started, I'm just going to shut myself down. So don't worry about that. It takes time. Podcasting is a long-term gain. It's not going to be an overnight, you know, gangbuster, huge podcast that, you know, millions of people are going to download it. That takes time. So get your voice out there. You have a message. You are important. Your message needs to be heard, and people want to hear from you. And the other fear on that part of it is that people aren't going to listen. No, who's going to listen to me? Well, people are going to listen to you. We're going to put you on like 30 different platforms that already have listeners hungry for the kind of content that you have. So those are two of the four crazy fears that we see coming up. And I'll just briefly touch on the other two. And the other two are one is the time that it takes to actually do a podcast. And so one of the main things I hear people saying is like, oh, another like social media thing to do. Like, I cannot do another thing. And I'm sure you hear this in your business too, Lisa. It's like podcasting is just another thing that on my list. And so I like to take podcasting and like flip it on its head. What if you created all the content you need for everything from your podcast for that entire month by sitting down and doing it for 2 or 3 hours? So if you sat down and created that content, or turn that podcast into all your social media posts, turn it into videos, turn it into transcriptions and blog posts, then you have all your content, writing articles and all this kind of stuff, guys. You can get that right from your few episodes a month. So the time investment is not as big as we think it is if we do it smart and think of it not as another thing to do, but thinking of it as the thing we do to create our content. And if you can get a couple months ahead, that's even better, right? Then less stress.
Yes, I love that so much, because not all work is created equal. And doing, like you said, sitting down for 2-3 hours, there are so many things you can repurpose and recreate from just that one episode. Or if you batch, like you said, you batch episodes, yes, you put your butt in the seat, but you got so much out of it at the end. So it's really rewiring the way you think about that. Like, you go in, you check email, you can get sucked down email for 2-3 hours and maybe not have productive outputs. But podcasting, huge productive output. So I love how you flip that on its head and touched on that.
Yeah. And even if you think about podcasting as like, what am I like, what, you know, if you strategically think about what your clients and customers audience want to hear too, and you make sure it's like a one crisp takeaway per show, that makes it even easier. And the way you do your show too, it makes it easier to repurpose it afterwards if you think about it at the beginning. So if you have like just what I'm doing here, the 4 things that are stopping people from podcasting, those 4 things each can be broken down into its own little segment, right? So thinking about how you design your content in a much more seamless way to then share afterwards. And before we go on too further, I want to make sure that we do number 4. Number 4 is a big one. And this is a funny one to me because we always say this, it's perfectionism that stops people. So that is number 4, perfectionism. And the kick in the pants that we all need to get over perfectionism is that if you're not embarrassed by your first few episodes, you waited too long to let them get out there. So every single podcaster out there, we go back and listen to their first few episodes. they might be okay, but they've gotten better over time. And that's the important thing, is that nobody cares about the first few episodes. If they don't sound super amazing, you're going to get better. You're going to get easier. It's going to be more seamless. Like Lisa's amazing intro she just did, like that probably didn't happen the first few episodes.
Oh no.
Yeah, and it sounded great, right? So that's the thing you just need to remember. Just keep going and you're going to get better as you go. And less edit points.
Yeah, and a lot of times people will ask me, they probably ask you the same thing. They say, do you ever go back and like listen to yourself from the beginning and judge yourself and go, oh, that was so bad? And I said, no. Like, do you ever go back and look at your first, Facebook lives or YouTube videos? I'm like, no. Like, and I look back at it, but I don't judge myself with it because at least I have the guts to start. That was where I started.
Exactly.
Like you said, it always gets better. And as you put yourself out there, people will recommend, hey, use this, do this, don't do that, talk to this person, go here. If you never put yourself out there and do the darn thing, then you'll never be able to get better because you've never started. So I love that. So how do you've got this crazy successful company teaching the heck out of people and you've got kiddos. How has that been, the balance between, motherhood and business and the online business and just managing all these hats and all these amazing things that you do? Has COVID shake that up a bit, or tell me a bit about how you make that all work?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's true. Like, how do you balance it all and juggle it all? And I think each family is so unique and has to like find their groove. Well, it's interesting. We both have Eric husbands that are amazing guys. And, without the Eric amazing husbands, I probably wouldn't be able to do what I do today because he's so supportive and he's like a full on dad. He is there and is helping me. It's not my job. It's not his job. It's a team effort. So thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't have been able to do as well as I do in business. And then on the other side of things, we sold our house. We had a successful, Eric was successful in his career. He was there for 18 years in the same company. That's like unheard of for someone under 40. And he was at the same job for so long. But what we found was that he was commuting like 3 hours a day. We had a house that he had saved up to buy for us. And, we lived in this house that was beautiful. We started outgrowing it as we had kids. And then we realized like, hey, like he's commuting 3 hours a day. We're like passing each other in the door. Is this really the life we signed up for? We did everything we're supposed to do, go to school, get a job, buy a house, all those things. And we're like, this is like the so-called Canadian American dream. And I'm like, this is not our dream. This sucks. We're out here. So, how the universe tells you little hints, and then finally slaps you in the butt. Well, this is what happened to us. We had this amazing house. We're like, yeah, we're growing out of it. We go to this beautiful cabin on a lake every weekend. It's his parents' property. It's 8 acres. We've been going there like for the last 12 years. Every weekend. He grew up going there. It's his happy place. And we're like, we're always leaving to go there. This place is empty like 8 months of the year. Why don't we just go there and see what it's like to live there? So as the universe so kindly helped us make our decision, it created a flood in our house where all of a sudden we had to move out for 6 weeks. And while we were out, we're like, we're halfway out. Why don't we just put the house on the market and see what happens? And we did. It sold in 2 days. So that was the universe's sign for us to start a new life, that we can live as a family, be happy, and just have that more nature experience. So we did. We moved a couple hours out of the city. We live by boat access only. My kids go to a school with only 70 kids. It's so small. But we live like on the land. The kids are outside most of the day. It's the experience and the family, and we're just so much happier as a family unit. Eric's also then being able to start a little business on the lake that is keeping him there. So he's able to help with kids more. I'm able to grow my online business because I can work from anywhere as long as we had a good Wi-Fi connection. That was the big thing. Like, we have to have Wi-Fi. We got this little hub, worked really hard on that. So now because of that, we've been able to balance. And I think it's, thank goodness, his parents are there sometimes too. So it's really a team effort between everyone in order to make it work. For now, me to thrive in my business, where Eric was the main breadwinner in his career. And so we've switched roles. And because of that, we've been able to kind of make it work. And everyone's so much happier because of it.
Yeah, it's like you can't, that's such a myth that you have to go at it alone, that you have to do it
Mm.
alone. And I get that a lot. People, sometimes people will say, you know, with our Erics, our, again, like my Eric is the same. We do everything as a team, like so hands on. And people say, well, I'm not as lucky to have an Eric like you. You know, I don't have a husband like yours. And I say, no, but you can hire help. If it's
Mhm.
not a spouse, if it's not, you know, a parent, there are many people that are dying to help, right? You
Mhm.
can hire help or have a good conversation. A lot of times, family members and people want to help, they don't know that you need the help because you've never
Yeah.
asked. I love this talk of team and teamwork
Yeah.
and having.
And allowing that help too, right? Like you're saying. So a lot of women think that we need to go out and do it our own, prove ourselves that we got to do it all. We cannot keep all those balls up in the air successfully all the time when something's going to drop. And so we need that team effort. So my kids now are just, we've been there for 3.5 years. And now tomorrow, my daughter's going to kindergarten. So, this is like a whole new leaf for us. So now we have two school age kids, where before we had a preschooler home, and when we first moved there, it was before either of them were in school. So now this also opens up a different opportunity. So I think seasons in life as well, that season was a little bit tricky for us trying to juggle and manage, and we had to be flexible. I had to sit at the dinner table after the kids went to bed and do some work. I had to get up a little bit earlier. Eric had to put off jobs until I was home and we could switch off. So, it was a lot of back and forth teamwork. But, now we're into a different season. Now we'll have to see how this season works. I think we need to go after school activities now. So now I got to stop working a little earlier in the day. So, just got to flow with it.
Totally. I love that flexibility. And that's what I was thinking about when you were saying that so-called, Canadian American, North American dream. Like, says who? I love that you're like, yeah, we were living it, but it wasn't bringing us joy, or
No.
or it was temporary joy, or maybe at one season in life it was joy, but now it's different. And I just love that flexibility and that flow. That sometimes it takes, you can either look at it as the universe nudging you, or a slap in the face, right? Like sometimes it takes getting knocked a bit to really
Mhm.
go, wait a second, what's the lesson in this? Or where is the universe nudging me to go? Because a lot of people would have said, oh my God, we got this flood in our house and we lost this and lost that, and just looked at the devastation instead
Yeah.
of, yes, there's devastation, but then what is the blessing and what is the
It
good?
really opened a door, right? Because my husband was in a job for 18 years. He is loyal and does not leave things like that. So that was a really, really big thing. Like that was after the house flooded, the house sold. That was the last thing holding us where we needed to be in somewhere close to that. So when he finally let that go and we were able to say, okay, think this will work. Let's give it a try. And we didn't say, let's move here forever. We said, let's give it a try. Let's see how it works. And we'll keep revisiting it. And in fact, the first winter, because we had to take a boat by car, a boat to our car, my kids were really young. They were 4 and 2. And so my son went into kindergarten, and we're like, you know what? It's only kindergarten. We took him out of kindergarten for 4 months, and we bought an RV and we went RVing down through California and Arizona and stuff for the 4 months. And when are we going to get a chance to do that again? When he wasn't working and I was just starting my business, it was just growing. So I was able to do it while we were RVing. And in fact, a podcast is what started that whole thing. I did a podcast on RVing, so I didn't know anything about it and I knew we wanted to go. So we created a summit, and from the summit, we sold the recordings from the back of a podcast. So I did a summit recording and a podcast recording, and that funded our entire trip. So it was kind of cool the way we had that opportunity to do that when normally we wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Yeah, I love where you said the words let go. You get to let that go. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
so many times we think we have to add new and do more. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it is just that letting go is actually what you need to do. Oh, I
Yeah,
love.
like, is this serving us anymore? Like, is this this job that he was at that was so amazing, and when he got out of high school, but over 20 years, the company kind of
Yeah.
wasn't as amazing as it was. And so instead of just sticking with it for the fact of sticking with it, like maybe our previous generations would have done, and then become miserable and not happy, and holding on to that way longer than it needs to be held on to. So yeah, I like that letting go, letting go, moving on, and oh my gosh, what a happier guy.
Right? I love that. And then like some world schooling of getting those kids out there. And you know, I'm like a firm believer in, I remember I heard a quote from Will Smith, and he said one thing his dad taught him was that everything is school. Everywhere is school. Every opportunity is school. And I was like, oh, that's so true. Like our kids are sponges and they are learning whether they are in the classroom or they are at home with you. I know even with us, we bring our little guy to all the events I speak at and the masterminds we go to, and we pull him out of school and he gets some world schooling and sees, you know, what mom and dad do for business and the whole bit. And they learn different life skills that way.
Totally. And I even think like being out of school since COVID, right now we're just about to go back to school, but after 5 months of being out, like the difference in my son who's now turned 8 this week is, you know, really interesting because he, you know, he got to build the swing with his dad. We did, you know, some mushroom identification in the backyard. We did like lots of school stuff, but it was not seeming like school stuff. So I think that education was so valuable for him to be able to like, you know, count, doing math using this dice game we found. And, you know, there's just so many other things, ways than the box that nothing against school, but like I think there's a place for it. But I think also it was a nice break for the kids to be able to learn some different kind of skills and different kinds of things. And the siblings actually, like, they are actually friends now. They can actually play together, whereas before the age gap, they weren't quite there. So that's been a really cool blessing in disguise, I think, with COVID.
Yeah, it makes me think about podcasting and that creativity and that place to be you and say things how you want to say things and express yourself how you want to express yourself. And I love that you were talking about that with the kids learning through different methods, and there is no who says you have to do it this one way. Like you said, systems and strategies are super helpful. I see them as like the starting point or the foundation. And then you put your flavor, your style, your voice on top of that. So talk to us about podcasting can be an incredibly strategic tool. I know I've gotten contracts in business, which is amazing, from people saying, I, you know, binge listen to your podcast and I know all about you and I know, you know, all about what you offer and what you do. And it makes the quote unquote sales process really easy when someone knows about you and what you stand for and your values and how you do things and the way you think. So talk to us a bit about, because I think a lot of times people go, oh yeah, I'm going to do a podcast, but you know, it's just going to be like a hobby, or it's just, I'm not really going to like go all in with it. And maybe they don't know the power of it. So talk to them a bit about the power in podcasting.
Yeah, I think podcasting is so underrated in the power that it holds. And so just to set the frame here, we work with podcasts that are like entrepreneurs who have a podcast. And so we're doing a little bit different kind of podcasting than I would say like the mainstream podcasting. We're not comedies or sports, and we're not out there seeking sponsorship and ads. We're actually looking to use our podcast to get a return into our business through, you know, expanding our network. So for our podcasters, one of the first things that we do when we're working with them is say, okay, if you were in front of a room speaking to 100 people, how excited would you be? They're like, yeah, super excited. Okay, so when you have 100 downloads on your podcast, that's, you know, that you got to think of it that way, right? We're not going after the millions over here, because in fact, if you had 10,000 people leads into your business, would probably put you out of business. So instead, we're a different kind of podcast. We're here for relationships. We're here to get those true fans, like you said, the lady who binge watched your show, and to the point where she was like, I know Lisa's my girl. I want to hire her now, right? That might take 6 months to a year. It might take 3 months, but that's going to happen with your podcast because you're speaking to that one person. You know who you work with. Like that's the key in podcasting. I think using it as a really cool way of networking. So I've used my podcast to instead of having a coffee date with someone, like Lisa was someone that was introduced to me by another person we know, Janice Porter, and she was on her podcast. And I was like, oh, I'd love to get to know Lisa. Well, instead of saying, hey, Lisa, do you have time for coffee? Well, we're all so busy right now. I said, hey, I have a podcast. She'd be a great guest. I'm going to get to know her by having this podcast interview with her. And then we decided to do podcasts with each other. So that was a really great tool for me to be able to get to know Lisa. Now I can start referring business to her. I know her values. We've had a conversation. We've had an interview. I'm going to interview her right after this. So it's really cool how podcasting's worked as a really neat networking tool. So reaching out to people who you might not have otherwise been able to cross paths with. Now you have something to offer as you know, even in the law of reciprocity, right? Like I offer you to come on my show and then you offer me to come on your show. Like it's really cool the way it works. And I think that if you look at your podcast in that way as a networking tool, is amazing.
Yeah, I love that you talked about reciprocity, because that is a business tool. That is a strategy. That is something in your back pocket that so many people, again, we want to help. And there's so many times when I'm like, yeah, I'll have you on the podcast, right? Or I'll be on your podcast. And your reach, it's like that 6 degree of separation, right? Where like people know other people in the industry and you don't know where your voice and your message is going to land. And that's the exciting piece. I love that. I know a lot of people ask me too, like, you know, do you want to put ads on your podcast? And I'm like, no. I'm not interested in going down that route. Mine is exactly like what you said. It's for building relationships. It's for sharing information. It's the education-based marketing piece of my business. And
and you share personal stuff in there too, right? So there is no way by hosting a podcast you can hide. You have to be authentic, because you're gonna run out of content if you're not authentic. If you're authentic, you're never gonna run out of content. And that's our test actually when we were launching shows. It's like, okay, can you see beyond topics for 12 to 14 episodes? And if not, then we have not peeled that onion back far enough. It's not the authentic show that you want to have. And so, like, I think there's no way to hide a podcast. That personality is going to come out. That personality is going to shine. And so when you're leading with service too, you're serving your audience with education, and you're inviting someone else onto your show. That's serving them to introduce them to your audience. Like, I think there's so many different ways that, you know, when we're leading with service, this is such a good tool to be able to use to do that. And, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed someone or someone else has interviewed me and they've turned into a client on the end of it. And that's, you know, not intentionally going in there, but just going in there to give great value. And not just me, so many of my clients, NLP coaches, nutritionists, doctors, like so many different clients are getting the same kind of results. And so I think what really above anything else is, and not to mention just, you know, Janice, who we mentioned before, she actually got a speaking gig from her podcast in front of 40,000 people on a stage. Like that's huge, right? So I think it's the opportunities that come from having a podcast that are so valuable.
I love that so much. And that's what I was thinking when so many people, again, say, I want to be a speaker. I want to be a speaker. Congratulations. Turn on the podcast and start speaking, or be on someone else's podcast. We don't have to overthink it. You create a stage for yourself when you get on a podcast, or you do it yourself. You know, back in the day, my husband was a creative director and graphic designer, and worked for agencies and all sorts of types of media. And the amount of money you would have to put into print ads, TV ads, media, the playing field is leveled now that we've got podcasting and the internet and social media, and we have the tools right at our fingertips to gain attention and viewership. That we don't have to pay millions of dollars, you know, to do that. So run them through. There are to-dos, and there are, you know, the moving pieces of having the podcast. And what are some of the things that, if you are an established business owner and you're looking to add another layer, you've already got products or courses or services, and you've decided it's time now for me to do a podcast, and you've got a budget, what are the things that you should stay in your zone of genius and do with the podcast? And what are some of the things that you should hire out and give to someone else to do so you don't go crazy in the process?
Yeah, that is an awesome question, because I think that you initially want to, this is my baby, I want to do it all and learn it all. In fact, so there's a lot of moving pieces that go into a podcast. So introduction and outro. So scripting those. We actually have an NLP coach that actually will look at our scripts for our clients, make sure that they're not repelling their audience, they're actually attracting. Secondly, then you have graphic artwork, like you need to have a cover art, and when you have a guest, you need to have cover art as well. So those is another piece. So that's another skill that you have to have. Then you have to be the talent that comes up with the content, or you have to be the person that reaches out to people. And then you have to edit your show. So there's some moving pieces in there. So editing your show, publishing your show, syndicating it out to all the platforms, dealing with those, tagging your show, all these things that are very technical, right? Then getting your show up onto a website and then writing the show notes. So here's the activities that I think you should do as, and I'm speaking specifically to the people that are those entrepreneurs out there. They're their voice, it's their content that's going on with their, you should be the content, you should create the content, deliver the content, and do a really good job of doing that. Another thing that I think should be your responsibility is reaching out to guests, because you're relationship building. If you've got someone else reaching out on your behalf, you might not be represented the way you want to be represented. And so I think you're going to miss out on building that relationship. So having that client outreach, the rest of it, someone else can do. Believe me, it's all easy skills that can be hired out to somebody else. You just stick with the content, you press record, send the files to us. We can do all that. I mean, that's what we do. And that's really what we pride ourselves on doing, is doing the done for you service for authors, coaches, speakers, people who are out there with a big mission and a big heart, and want to see a return in their business. You stick with the relationships and the content, and it's going to take you far.
I love that, because, the ego, when you're like a control freak and you're good, like you're a doer, I may be speaking from experience, when you're a doer that like gets things done and you work well under pressure and you know how to figure it out and you're smart, you're almost, the ego gets in the way and you're like, I can do a Canva graphic and I can write a show note and I can put that intro outro buffer on there. But I always think that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that hour or 2 hours or even 20 minutes, sometimes I think about the little things that I do. I'm always like gut checking myself. The little things that I do, even though they're 20 minutes, I'm like, Lisa, you're fooling yourself, because when you compound 20 minutes a couple times a week all the way in the month, it's like 8 hours, and you're like, oh my God, that's like a whole day or 2 days of work, right? Depending on how many hours a day you decide to work. And even those little things, if you're in a position that you can hire, just let it go. If you're not in a position maybe that you can hire, I would still say do it, because then that means you need to make revenue in your business. So all the more reason why you should be doing the content and the outreach and letting someone else. I always say that to people when they're like, yeah, but you're a done for you service. And, and I'm like, if you're broke, you should hire me, because then you get to stay in your zone of genius and do what you do. And that's exactly what you talked about. So I love that.
Yeah, I always tell people, stick in your lane and stick in your lane. And I swear that's when my business took off too. When we stopped doing the publishing books and online courses and all the things that we could do, because we knew how to do them, stop doing all those things, and we just do what we do best. And it's interesting, because I really think that this will serve your audience, because if you need to know how something's done, no problem. We will walk you through step by step of how this works, how you set up your show, what's the strategy behind it. That's all your intellectual input anyways that we need in a show. So very much you're included in a part of the setup. But then once the setup's set, it's like a well-oiled machine that can just run with you giving the content and then bringing it to us, and not even just us, to anyone. You can hire anyone to do this. But the fact is that if you are one of those people that need to know how it works, you can know how it works, but you don't have to do it. But it's good to know. For some people, it's good to know, just in case something breaks down, then they're able to change their own tire, right? Just in case. But there's always a mechanic around.
I love that, because so many people do say that, oh, but but I need to know how to do it in case
Yeah.
the world blows up tomorrow and I'm the last person standing on it. You know?
Yeah, and they want to make sure that it's their show still, right? Like, and that nobody wants to take away your show. Like, it's your content, your creative input, that's the cool thing about podcasting. So it's like the wild west for creativity out there. So you can do any kind of show you want. I can tell you what's going to work and what's not going to work in certain areas. I can tell you some strategy behind some things, but like at the end of the day, the creativity is totally yours. Like, go for it. That's what people are going to, it's going to make you unique.
I love that. So you have some very generous, very amazing free gifts that are going to help anyone listening out there, you listening. And if you've ever said, oh my gosh, I want a podcast, I encourage you to get these free gifts. So what do you have for them, Michelle?
Absolutely. So one of the last thing I want to mention is that podcasting to me is kind of like how backlinking websites worked back in the day. So you going on to having your own show is super important. And we love that for the connections and being able to serve and reach out to people. But the other thing that's cool is being a guest on someone else's show. So by going out and being a guest on someone else's show, you're leaving your show and your interview out there on their show. Then their listeners are going to listen. Who knows, 3 months from now, 6 months, 6 years from now, they're going to listen. My friend Scott Payton was on his show this week. It was 15 years he's had this show. And he's had people reach out interviews from like 10 years ago. So it's there forever. And so then it's just more and more ideas. So where we were talking about paid ads and all the social media, that kind of stuff, that disappears like that. That ads only run once in that newspaper and it's gone. These interviews are here forever. So it's a really great strategy to spend your time. So the gift I'm giving you is at mypodcastcoach.com/gifts. There's 2 different gifts there. On mypodcastcoach.com, I work with my friend Evans, and Evans was the mastermind behind a $500,000 a year revenue podcast, all from passive income from the podcast, and it sold for 6 figures. So him and I partnered up and delivered the guide to the 5 ways to monetize your show. This is great for all those experts out there. This is a really smart way of monetizing your show. And the second gift is 7 places that you can list yourself as a guest expert, where podcasters are currently looking for guests. So get yourself up there, get yourself listed as a guest and start networking. You can also, if you're a host, list yourself as a host on a lot of these shows if you're looking for guests on your show.
I love that. And they can get that at...
So it's mypodcastcoach.com/gifts with an S on the end there.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. So don't worry if you are driving the car right now, or you got one kid in each hand, or laundry, or whatever you got going on. You're listening on your lunch break. I will put that in the show notes to make sure that you do not miss out on those gifts. I will also put Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, website, all the ways that you can get in touch with Michelle. I know that, I was laughing as I asked that question about what should you be doing or what shouldn't you be doing, because I was personally sharing with Michelle that I'm like creating my own Canva graphics and like tearing my hair out and realizing that I'm not in my zone of genius. So I will be hiring her services, and it's just, when that time is for you to get the help, and you want to invest in someone that knows what they're doing and is going to accurately put your best self out there. I always say, both of us being in that done for you service industry, we are an extension of you and your team. We treat your business like we treat our business, with love and attention and care and just utmost excellence. And that's what you want. That's why a lot of us get into this done for you service, because, so many people want to work with 20 different people, and it doesn't always work that way. Or somebody out of those 20 are not excellent. And then it ticks off all the other of us who are excellent, going, hey, but we could do that better. So you want to go with a done-for-you service that really knows how to tick off all those boxes and take care of you. So at least, I hope you will at least download those free gifts. They sound absolutely amazing. Michelle, thank you for, coming off the boat and coming on to the land to come and record this. I know this is of great value to my listeners, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's been so much fun. And I just love what you've got here. I think this show is awesome. And I listen to it myself personally and think it's an amazing show. So you've done something really special here. Your listeners are amazing. So thank you for having me and sharing this time with me.
Yay, thank you, thank you. And I'm actually going to be, we're double duty back to back here. I'm actually going to be on Michelle's podcast next. So I will make sure listeners that I post that link and check out my interview with her. So as always, thank you for tuning in. I know your time is precious. There's lots of things that you coulda, shoulda, woulda been doing, and you chose to be here with us. So hopefully you'll go back to this. You'll listen to it again. You'll take some notes. You'll dig in. You'll download those free gifts. And as always, I honor you. Thank you for being here. And I'll see you again next time on The Lisa Pezik Show.